Let's talk about the global fertility crisis and what it might mean for the trends and prices of assets in the coming years and decades. This is a fundamental and theoretical discussion. I don't know that there's a correct answer, but these are the sorts of things to think about to have opportunities, but also one of the reasons I think about this is how to protect myself. Now, these are the sorts of things that I used to think about when it came to investing and trading. These big fundamental trends and shifts in society. As I got deeper into trading, and the trading addiction, it became like, is the price of Bitcoin going to go up or down today? Or it became, there's a moving average crossover. What should I do? Should I close this position? Right? Just like in a microscope of this tiny little thing, when you really got to zoom out and look at these macro trends to have a better idea. So now that I have bots running the trades for me, and the systems that I have asking me to trade very rarely, I have the mental bandwidth to approach investing and trading from a fundamental perspective again. And perhaps this is what I'll spend some time on the channel going into. I said I'm not going to do daily videos on this channel in 2025. It's not likely, but I still think about things in the market, and this is what we're going to discuss in this video. So welcome in, much love. Trav here if you don't know me. I'm an investor and entrepreneur. That sounds better. Investor and entrepreneur living here on Oahu. So the fertility crisis. The world on the whole is trending down fast in terms of fertility. And a lot of the world is already, I'm going to wait for this ambulance to pass. Okay, so a lot of the world is under replacement for fertility already. And the part of the world that isn't under replacement, that's still breeding positively, it's still trending down. So it's all trending down. Now, a good place to start is to look at the place in the world that has the lowest fertility, and this is the lowest fertility of any place on record, and that's South Korea. So to understand, it takes two people to make a baby. So to have a 100% replacement rate, so where the next generation is the same size as the previous generation, the fertility rate needs to be 2. Each person has 2 children. So if on average people have 3 children, the next generation will be 150% the current generation, or 50% bigger. Right? If there's 1 million people, everybody has 3 kids, the next generation there's going to be 1.5 million people. Under 2, you have a smaller generation. If on average 1 million people, each person has 1 person, the next population, the next generation will be only 50%, or half. Out of 1 million people, there'll be 500,000. The South Koreans are even half of 1. They're at 0.6 per person. So out of 1 million people, the next generation is only going to have about 300,000 people. That's crazy, right? And if we're to assume that this doesn't change, and it probably will, we don't know if it'll go up or down, in 4 generations, for 100 South Koreans, they will between them have 1 great-great-grandchild. Sorry, 1 great-grandchild. Not great-great, 1 great-grandchild. So a lot of other countries, such as the US and such as the UK, in terms of population, are following South Korea. And we'll talk about immigration as well. We're going to talk about a lot of things in this talk. But the question is, what are happening to asset prices in South Korea? I actually don't know about the currency. Maybe someone could research that. I didn't. I'd be interested to see. However, what I do know is in 2024, the South Korean stock market went down. Whereas in 2024, the US stock market set almost record years, Bitcoin up, gold up. How is it that the South Korean stock market went down? Well, when you have a decreasing population, GDP is decreasing, business activity is decreasing, the value of stocks is going to go down. So that answers one question. Now, what about housing? What has it done to the price of housing? Well, actually, half of South Koreans live in Seoul, which is the major capital, major city, Seoul Metro, and it's the most expensive city to live in the world. As of right now, it's like 15 times your annual income to rent or to even own a property. Interesting. That's one of the reasons people aren't breeding, is because it's too expensive to even survive. Now, at the same time that Seoul has higher prices, the outskirts of South Korea are seeing housing price collapse. And you see this in the hollowing out of factory towns in the U.S., rural Japan, but in South Korea, there's certain housing markets that are going to zero. Nobody wants to live there. There's ghost towns. There's not so much infrastructure there. There's no schools now. Nobody's in school. So you can buy something in the country for really cheap. Do you want to when no one's out there? And it's maybe also just suburbs. I don't know how close it is to nature. But I don't know if the total housing market is up or down. But what happens when you have population collapses, some markets actually increase, but a lot of markets go to zero for housing, and it makes sense that the stock market would go to would decline. Right? With me. Now let's look at the U.S. I care about the U.S. because I live in the U.S. I keep U.S. currency, and I at times invest in U.S. stocks. The U.S. has a little bit of a different situation than South Korea. So the U.S., I think it's like 1.4-ish is how many kids the U.S. is having. So this will lead to significant population decrease. 1.4 is the next generation is 30% smaller. And if you project this for a couple generations, it's a massive loss of population. Now you may say, Trev, but they're having immigrants come and replace the population and boost the population. And you're correct. That won't work forever, though. Here's a number of things that can happen. One, there can't be 9 billion people in the U.S. or 100 billion. There's a limit. It's going to get too crowded at some point. There's also globalization, where at some point living in the U.S. will be equal to living in Africa or India or wherever. There's going to be a relative equilibrium that happens. And it's also that the fertility trend is decreasing from the regions we're importing to the U.S. from. So when you have a global population collapse, eventually that's probably going to come everywhere. So I don't have a crystal ball of when this will happen, but I think it's likely it will happen, possibly in my lifetime. But it takes possibly generations to play out. So I might not be here, it might not matter. What makes the U.S. situation unique is that the U.S. has so much debt. So the game the U.S. is playing right now is it can pay that debt as long as GDP keeps increasing, that business grows because the population is growing. There's a strong correlation between GDP and population. It's not one-to-one, but generally more people you can produce more goods, fewer people you can't produce as many goods. So essentially the U.S. is running a sort of Ponzi scheme where it needs to keep immigrating new people and importing new people to keep growing GDP, to keep debt reasonable. And this is the era that we've lived in a long time, where there is inflation, but it's not crazy intolerable inflation, except recently it was pretty bad. But it's not hyperinflation. And you have a growing economy with more people coming in. how long can this last? It will not last forever. So something that's going to happen eventually is when the population starts to collapse, and we know that the population collapse will lead to a collapse in the value of stocks, or at least a decline, and many housing markets going to zero. Some of them in more desirable places may be increasing. But before that happens, it's likely there will be a debt jubilee. What is a debt jubilee? A debt jubilee is when a country will issue so much currency that there's hyperinflation that wipes out previous debt. Has this happened in modern history? It has. So we're going to have to examine that too. But why it seems inevitable that this will happen is if they cannot keep growing the U.S. GDP and growing the U.S. population, but the debt compounds and snowballs, eventually the only way to get rid of the debt is going to be, and the easiest way to get rid of the debt is going to be printing so much money. So say the debt becomes 100 trillion. If they print like 1,000 trillion, I don't even know. We're going to get acquainted with new numbers in the coming years. I don't know. Trillion is new to me. We didn't grow up with trillion. Coming up soon, we're going to have what's beyond a trillion, 1,000, right? So you can print so much money, it wipes out the debt. Now, this happened in post-World War I Germany. The Germans lost. The Treaty of Versailles was very harsh on the Germans, and it imposed a massive repayment schedule upon the losers of the war, who were deemed to be at blame, which is Germany. And the Germans had no choice but to devalue their currency to get out of debt. And they did this. And some interesting things about this time: there was a lot of chaos. People were struggling. Something that sticks in my mind is city folk going to the countryside and raiding farms for food and animals, which is wild. But there was actually mass employment during this time. And it was just turn around, you get money, you go to the store, you spend it that day. But there was mass employment. And during the hyperinflation, it is true that assets mooned. The stock market had insane rallies, but also had insane drawdowns. But they didn't keep up with inflation. So if you're investing in stocks, you became a multimillionaire. But it didn't mean that much. It was better than just holding the currency. But the people who did the best, they took out a lot of fiat debt because the fiat debt turned to nothing. And they used that fiat debt to fund and buy businesses and just participate in the economy. Speculators, in a sense, weren't the ones who benefited the most from it. The best speculation was in fiat debt. It wasn't in stocks or real estate. It was in fiat debt because that would just get wiped out, and using that for business. So what I foresee happening in the U.S. eventually, I don't know when, is population starts to turn the other way. It's necessary to have a debt jubilee, a period of hyperinflation, which will be very chaotic. And the move there will be to, if possible, take out fiat-denominated debt, and buying hard assets such as Bitcoin, gold, and stocks and housing can be okay. But real-world cash flowing business in that scenario actually seemed to be the best. But those other things are fine. And now I'm going to come back to Bitcoin and gold as well. Following that, though, once the debt has been wiped out and the population is steadily declining, the supply of housing increases, the demand for housing decreases. Certain areas of housing will go up, other areas will be zero. If you want to live in the burbs or the boonies or the farmland or the country, it'll probably be really cheap. But housing is going to decline. We're also going to see stocks declining, stock market declining. And it's likely we would also see gold and Bitcoin decline, as would all be tethered together at this point. And I'm not just talking about a correction, but I'm talking like a secular trend. Now, Bitcoin's interesting. Bitcoin does offer some protection against the debt Jubilee, and that's one of the things that's nice about it, is and what it's designed for. And it's worked. It's increased its value compared to the dollar. It's also increased its value compared to gold and housing. I'm not convinced that it's going to way outperform other assets the way it has as it becomes more mature, that it's going to swallow the world. It's possible it can, but Bitcoin also comes with its certain risks. One of them is if there's crises in producing energy, it can be hard to secure the network and cause of security problems. There could be crisis of confidence in the protocol itself, where with Bitcoin, the beauty of it is the transparency of the monetary policy and the difficulty in changing that monetary policy. And in order to enforce that feature, Bitcoin has to be very lightweight, cockroach that can be ran on anyone's computer, nodes out there. The issue is that prevents scaling. So Bitcoin is not the best at transacting quickly. So in a world where the block subsidy approaches and reaches zero, and you have transaction fees, but there's limited blocks, this doesn't happen for 100 years, but this is going to be a problem. And they can say, well, we're just going to increase the block subsidy to avoid this problem. That may cause a crisis of confidence, because now we're just going to change the Bitcoin code to print more Bitcoin, right? Probably don't need to worry about that for a long time. But the point of this video is to take some time to consider things that can go wrong, looking far into the future, things that can happen in our lifestyle. The US dollar could go to zero and assets could moon, debt could get wiped out. At the same time, we could also enter really, really long secular bear trends where, like Japan in the 90s, Japan peaked and it took 35 years to make a new all-time high. Something like that could happen as well. Or something could happen like failed stock markets around the world, where we peak and we trend towards zero. Those things could happen. So how do you protect yourself? Well, thinking about these things, recognizing the broader trends is helpful, but also just having cash flowing businesses is good. Being useful in society, producing an income, having a following, audience, things like this. So, I don't have all the answers. Curious what you think. Comment down below. Zoom out a little bit. Let's think about the next 10, 20, 40, 50, 100 years. So appreciate y'all. And as always, if you want to check out my trading system, which is meant to take advantage of the bigger trends, but also stay out of the market during these major downtrend possibilities, there's a link to it down below. Go check it out. Appreciate y'all. Much love. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.